opportunities for communities of color. And we were going to work on economic development, entrepreneurship, and business issues. And then Trayvon Martin got killed. And it brought us face to face with the tragedy of law enforcement violence, the tragedy of citizen violence against people of color and people around this country. And we realized we could not go forward and promote economic development and community development at the same time people were being killed, ridiculously murdered for no reason, going to a convenience store. So we decided to start a day of nonviolence. We went to the Obama White House. I will just tell the story here. And we asked them to endorse it. In fact, we wanted President Obama to convene a meeting of governors and mayors and just have a big summit and talk about how can we change the culture of violence. But the timing wasn't right. And they determined, no, it wasn't an issue that they wanted to address at that time. So being a group of fairly assertive individuals, we said, okay, we're going to do it anyway. So we had our own day of nonviolence. And for several years, we convened people in Washington, D.C. to talk about and study this issue. What is going on? It expanded to a week. And now this year, we are having a month of nonviolence. We call it the month of families, nonviolence, and opportunities. We call it families because we learned that violence starts at the kitchen table. And the whole issue of domestic violence, violence of parents against their children, children against their parents, that's where a lot of this begins. We then go from the families to nonviolence. We very much believe in the mission of Dr. King and the nonviolence leaders who transformed America in the 60s and the 50s, and we went from segregation to integration. And then our third concept is opportunities. We have heard from the young people over this decade that what they miss are dreams. They believe that the baby boomers and the X generation are so consumed with themselves that they have forgotten to take time with the Gen Zs, with the millennials. We have forgotten to give them dreams, to give them opportunities. And some of the young people told us, look, we're violent, we're in gangs, we're angry because our parents are so full of stress. They don't like each other, they don't like the neighbors, they don't like their coworkers, they don't like their supervisors. Everything in our house is stress. And so between the stress that we experience and the lack of opportunities, we're violent. That's the message from the young people. So we began to look at ways to promote policies, and we were fortunate enough to meet a wonderful member of Congress who's very accessible, and she's with us this evening, Congresswoman Gwen. And I'm going to introduce her in just a moment because she's a real hero, and I want all of you to know. But in my opening remarks, I just want to make the point to everyone on this call, we have to start a movement, folks. We cannot depend on the politicians, the corporations, the government officials at the state or local levels to understand the urgency of de-escalation. We have to do it. We have to find a model city that's willing to bring their violence number down to zero. We have to find communities in this country that are willing to step out there and change their community without or with legislation. We hope to get it. We hope to get legislation, but if we don't, the issue is much too important. So we plan to proceed. This is our month of nonviolence. It began October 1st. It continues until October 31st. We invite all of you to go onto our website, themonthofnonviolence.org, and sign up for fantastic events like what you're going to hear tonight. We have events that started last week and will run through the entire month. Youth summits, discussions on domestic violence, prayer calls. We're going to have a march in Birmingham, Alabama of young people against violence, all kinds of activities. So please get involved. Follow the role modeling that you're going to see tonight by these citizens on this call who are from all over the country. People dedicated to peace, love, and understanding. And please join us for the Keckley Awards, which is Saturday night. You'll see it on the website I mentioned. We're going to be honoring outstanding leaders. Attorney Ben Crump who got the historic legal victory for the family of George Floyd in that horrible murder case last year. We're going to be honoring Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds, who is our chaplain, who was very close to Coretta Scott King and wrote her biography. We're going to honor the National Black Nurses for all the work that nurses do. And the fact that they go to work every day in the middle of the COVID is absolutely incredible. We have a man that none of you have ever heard of named Mickey Stevenson, who was the power behind Motown. He changed the culture of America with music. And that's what we've got to do. Change the culture of violence however we can. So please join us. And our guest this evening, who's going to speak with us about nuts and bolts of how to make change, is really an outstanding leader from the state of Wisconsin. And Congresswoman Gwen Moore, I really think so highly of her, of you, Madam Congresswoman, because she is on with us, because she's accessible. And this is an issue that has become increasingly problematic in America. Politicians get elected and then you can't reach them. But we contacted Congresswoman Moore because we learned that she had developed some legislation on de-escalation to train law enforcement officers. And we went and we met with her and we said, Madam Congresswoman, we've read your legislation and we want to ask you to take it and make it broader, not just for law enforcement officials, but for the entire country. And she agreed to do that. And she will share with you the details of her legislation that she has introduced 3 times. And it hasn't yet made it to committee. And we've got to get it to the floor because the Congresswoman wants to have funding for all of your programs to teach people de-escalation. We've got to teach the parents, the teachers, the children, the health educators, everyone in this society. And wouldn't America be beautiful if we all knew how to de-escalate? Wouldn't this be an incredible model for the world if America could put down the guns and forget the racism, forget the violence, forget the hate, forget the ugliness? We have to show how to do that. So Congresswoman Moore is here. She serves now on the Ways and Means Committee. She's a member of the Select Revenue Measures Committee. She's an outstanding leader on the Research and Technology Committee. She's working with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Equity Caucus. And she has a strong commitment to working for women, for people of low income communities, and working for the people that don't have the privilege in America. So we are proud of her. We appreciate her. And Congresswoman Gwen Moore, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our De-Escalation Committee. Thank you very much.
Okay. I unmuted myself.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Myers, for that generous introduction. After that, such a flattering introduction, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say. But let me really cut to the chase. This 10-year anniversary demonstrates the labor of love that this has been. And I just want to lift you up, Dr. Myers, for not giving up in this period of time on your vision to be able to elevate the discussion of de-escalation to a point that it can be made into policy. I don't want you to give up saying, I've introduced it 3 times. There are things we introduced more than 3 times before we got them passed, like the child tax credit, which is refundable, as an example. But that being said, don't give up. You're the Black Women for Positive Change is named that because it is that. Let me just digress for a minute and say, when we had the so-called failed police reform negotiations, as part of that bill was the other de-escalation training for officers. And everybody thought that that was kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of what could be negotiated. So I still think that we're on solid ground in terms of being able to get this bill funded, because even during the heat of those partisan disagreements, and not just partisan, but elements of race and so on, de-escalation was something that everybody was able to check off on. So we should not give up. I think that the pandemic, our not coming together has been a factor, but that is low hanging fruit. I'll tell you something, to quote from Milwaukee's Blueprint from Violence, violence prevention, violence, both interpersonal and structural, poses a serious threat to the health and safety and well-being of Milwaukee residents. And that's sort of key. This is a health issue, it's a safety issue, and we need to change the culture of violence in our communities. And that is how I got hooked up with you, Dr. Stephanie Myers. I am so excited about the folk that you have brought together. I have read their impressive biographies. Wait to hear what they can share with us, because what we know is that there is science and there are processes and procedures. There are defensive things that we can do to try to intervene in violence, because the violence in our community is heartbreaking. And just too numerous for me to expound on it at this particular point. I'm just thinking earlier of, this month, of an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old who were shot just sitting in the car, and someone drove by and shot and killed them in my own town. And so, Dr. Myers, I want to start with this legislation, and all it does is that it provides $100 million per year, a grant program to the Department of Health and Human Services to provide de-escalation grants to a wide range of community stakeholders to undertake de-escalation training to help prevent conflicts from escalating to violence in our communities. And I know that this is being recorded because this is going to be part of the record of proof that these interventions make a difference. And the good news is that this event that you do every year, Dr. Myers, really reminds us that we really can do something about it. We don't have to be helpless bystanders. I can tell you we are influencers. I am so pleased that just today, the governor of my state is investing $25 million of the money we received through the COVID relief funds for violence prevention programs in my town. And so we have effective violence interrupters, and we want to become a model for this. And so let's not give up on that, because we need to provide these resources to every community based on the structures in those communities, in the institutions and trusted partners in those communities. We're never going to change the sad trajectory of gun violence and other violence without making serious investments in these communities. So thank you for the partnership, Dr. Myers. One family, one little girl who dies through violence is too much. De-escalation is not a cure-all, but we do know that if we invest in this pre-conflict tool, that we are going to prevent someone from dying. President Biden has proposed in his fiscal year 2022 budget and his Build Back Better agenda new funding for evidence-based community violent interventions. In fiscal year 22, Department of Labor, Health and Human Services funding bill, I work to make sure that language is included to allow the CDC to use those violent prevention funds for community de-escalation training and conflict mitigation skills development. So, I just sort of try to get in where I can fit in, Dr. Myers. But our work isn't done, and we're not going to cede our commitment to funding community-based strategies. And so I yield back to you, Dr. Myers.
Well, thank you, Madam Congresswoman. I yield to our moderator, Felicia Washington.
Thank you so much, Thank you to both of you for Dr. Byers for opening, and also to Representative Moore. It's important, this work, and learning these skills are so important. I just want to welcome everyone to this de-escalation workshop. As mentioned, this is part of the Black Women for Positive Change Month of Nonviolence, and we're so excited to have you here, both on the Zoom and streaming with us on Facebook. My name is Felicia Washington. I work with the National Association for Community Mediation, and I'll be moderating this evening. To give you a little outline of the evening, we'll be starting with some of our esteemed panelists. They will share their knowledge on the different aspects of de-escalation. They'll explain what it is exactly, why it's important. We'll then move into small breakout rooms. Each of them we'll just want you to discuss de-escalation in your communities and on a smaller level. And then we'll return to the larger group after that. We'll share what we learned. Maybe we can summarize what you discussed in your breakout rooms. And then hopefully you'll be able to leave with having gained some ideas on how you can bring de-escalation skills into your community and into your circle of influence. At this point, we are going to move on to our first panelist. If you saw the flyer, we had Shawana Vaughn on the flyer, but she is unable to join us tonight. We are honored to have Ruth McDaniels join us, and Miss McDaniels is an Everytown Survivor Fellow. The Everytown Survivor Fellowship Program is with the organization whose full name is Everytown for Gun Safety. And they partner with survivors as they share their stories with the public, help people become involved in and connected with gun violence prevention movement. And the fellows receive training on how to speak before local community groups, how to testify in common sense gun laws, and how to participate in media interviews. And so at this point, please welcome me in join me in welcoming Ruth McDaniels.
Hello, everybody. Clearly, this is short notice. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that I really needed to put on a jacket or something to get dressed for this. I'm so sorry. But I'm speaking for Shawana Vaughn and her organization. Her organization is Silent Cries, and it deals with impacted trauma from incarceration. And my organization is Breaking the Chains of Your Mind. And that deals with parents who speak to gun violence. I'm a parent of an active shooter, and how gun violence not only interrupts the lives of the victims, but also the lives of the parents of the people who do the actual shooting. And how does that relate to de-escalation, and how we as community stakeholders, need to take hold of our responsibility in actively participating in the things that go on in our communities. Now, I live in Harlem. For the most part, some blocks are very nice, some blocks are very disenfranchised. And I'm also 25 years in retirement. Thank God I retired from 25 years of law enforcement. So I understand what de-escalation should look like and what it can look like, provided we actually take ownership of how we want to address certain things. I don't know what exactly y'all want me to discuss in regards to that. If you could give me a little hint. I'm pretty good at just free flowing, but if you give me some direction, I'd appreciate it. What is it you want me to talk about specifically?
Absolutely. Well, our evening is related to de-escalation, the importance of de-escalation, and how de-escalation in certain circumstances can prevent the gun violence that is so prevalent in our society. So the person we had planned to, I was told, had a story that's specifically related to how, in her case, de-escalation might have created a different outcome, possibly. And so if you have anything to share personally or with the work that you do about how de-escalation might have impacted that work or could have impacted that work, we'd love to hear about it.
Well, thank you again for having me. Well, in my community, I've noticed since George Floyd, there's been a real step back on the part of law enforcement on how they engage in activities that go on in our communities. a position that I have a problem with. I used to be, up until June, in fact, I decided not to run for precinct council vice president. I had been that for 7 years because I had a real bad taste in my mouth when I noticed how law enforcement would engage with the community and how things were allowed to escalate. I mean, if you have a circumstance in my community, because incarceration rate is so high, 1 in 3 households are affected, people are less likely to contact the police, because any involvement with the police, if you're on parole or probation, is an indication that you are subject to violation. And because of that, people don't pick up the phone and say, I'm gonna call the police. They handle it themselves. But for the ones who do call the police's attitude is pretty, handle it type of response. They're not as gangbuster as they should. And it's my observation, if they would even take a front step in that, and de-escalating it at the point of a call, instead of trying to say, oh, well, it's going to be a cross complaint, or, oh, well, it's not something we can handle. That's a civic matter. That's not a criminal matter. If they just got in front of it, we could put away a lot of the confusion, because people respond to circumstances based on where they are at. So now, if you have people who are dealing in trauma and in poverty, I won't say abject poverty, but in poverty, living in communities that don't have, the aesthetics are off, the streets are filthy, there's garbage, there's displacement, there's despair, and you have people coming out with that on a daily basis, and they are forced to have to navigate that terrain and interact with people who have mental health issues. You're going to have a crash. And if the police don't know that they need to step in to circumvent that, all they can do is perpetuate it. And when you deal with people who are at their lowest point and they're in survival mode, it can only lead to violence. It's not even that they want it to lead to violence, it's that they don't know how to even communicate. When I was in law enforcement 7 years ago, I distinctly said I had to get my degree in communications, because I knew it was imperative that I learn how to communicate on a level that gave clarity. It made no sense for me to try to articulate to a community that was so angry and so disenchanted with what was going on, and I couldn't communicate to that need. So the first thing we have to do when we say we want to de-escalate is learn how to have the conversation. And what does that conversation look like? It should look like empathy, it should look like concern, and it should look like change. And if it doesn't look like all three of that, then something is wrong. Because if I tell you, I hear you, I empathize with you, and I can't change your narrative, I might as well go home and lay down. We have to bring a change. It has to be something visual. And even if it's just like, I did a radio show the other day, and the gentleman asked me, what did I like to leave off with? I said, well, if I just leave off with everybody being responsible for their own block or in front of their building and picking up the trash or asking their super holes in front of their building and sweeping up, you'll change the narrative of those people coming out every day. And you might think that that might be minuscule, but you don't know what a difference it makes when someone comes out of a building, getting ready to go to work, God knows where they work, and come out to a clean environment, and come out to something that's smelling fresh and has a good presentation. I have a woman here today who pulled up all the flowers from the tree beds in front of my buildings. And my building's not mine personally, I'm a tenant association president. But the young people who sit on the stoop and smoke weed all day told me this happened as soon as I came downstairs. And I was surprised that they even told me, because I never thought they paid it any mind. They were just so smoked out, I didn't think they cared. And the lady said, but miss, I'm going to fine her. I said, well, why would you do that? Don't argue with them. This was her narrative. She said, she's messing up our peace. Those are our flowers. Now, she never helped me plant nothing. But in her mind, those are her flowers, and I'm good. I'm good with that, because I did plant them for her. She said to me, I know who she is. I said, how do you know? She said, because after she pulled up the flowers, dig this, she urinated in the street and her EBT card fell out. Of course, they picked up the EBT card. So now we know who she is. But she wants to fight her for pulling up the flower. I have to say to her, the flowers are not that important. We have to know that was an outcry. It's not normal for a woman to urinate in the middle of the street, nor go along the sidewalk seeing pretty flowers and pulling them up. So now, when we say de-escalation, it looks like on any and every level, because this woman doesn't even know in her mental state, she's probably medicated. Her behavior does not describe one who's mainstream. There's something going on there with young people, and the young people want to get at her. We have to be able to know, we have to seize opportunities of engagement, and we have to move in that space without fear and without hesitation. It comes anywhere. It comes anywhere and at any time. And the engagement begins with us. The escalation begins with us. We can't wait for NYPD. Well, at least I can't, not in my community, because I know it's only going to escalate. If the kids see her and she say something crazy, and I said that, if she say something crazy, what are you going to say? I already know what they're going to do. They either going to try to jump her or drag her or rob her. It's just going to escalate. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. We can talk about de-escalation, but I'm a little further. I need everybody here to know what de-escalation is and actively engage in it and not wait for someone else to come. There's no help coming. It's not dressed in blue. It's not dressed in gray. It's not dressed in brown. It's dressed in whatever you have on right now. You go, you see situations. We're past the time of, oh, I don't want to get involved. Let me keep my mouth shut. People are dying.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your insight, and you've just really spoken a word to us today on the importance of de-escalation, and you've pivoted perfectly into our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to actually tell us what is de-escalation, because we've mentioned it several times already. We want to make sure everyone in this Zoom has a very clear understanding of what we're talking about. And so Dr. Joseph Bach is a director of the School of Conflict Management, Peace Building and Development at Kennesaw State University outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And he's a co-convener of the Trust Network and a former Missouri legislator. In his current role, he helps students nurture the nexus between conflict resolution and social justice. So at this point, we'd like to welcome Dr. Bach, and hopefully you can explain what is this de-escalation we're talking about.
Well, thank you, Felicia. I think former Officer McDaniels gave us a great example of what it is. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. I'm going to go through a few terms and provide definitions just as background for everybody so that we understand the terminology. And then I'm just going to talk briefly about the big picture for tonight, what we're trying to accomplish. And first of all, when we use the word de-escalation, it's helpful to look at it as an effort to reduce tension when tension is increasing. It's about not necessarily violence. It could be a lot of different ways that tension is manifesting itself, such as pulling flowers out. That's a great example. Violence prevention, on the other hand, is a very wide range of issues that are intended to prevent violence, but that can be very early in the process of people starting to build consensus to becoming violent, or it can be later on. It can involve what's called structural prevention, which is standing up for justice, for instance, or it can counteract acute tensions, which is often called operational prevention. So there's structural prevention, the macro level prevention, and then there's operational prevention, which is to prevent acute tension from turning into violence. And when we say violence interruption, which is a term that's being used a lot more these days, it's talking about interrupting violence right before it happens. It's right there on the very precipice of a situation becoming violent. All of these are not the same as what we refer to when we refer to active bystander intervention. Active bystander intervention is aimed at reducing harm. It's trying to prevent someone from hurting someone else. So you can think about the parable of the Good Samaritan. The people who walked by the individual who had been mugged were bystanders. They were not active bystanders. The active bystander was a Samaritan. He did something to help the other person. So generally speaking, there are 5 different ways that people are engaged in active bystander intervention. And I take these from one of our faculty members, Dr. Maya Hallward. They're called the 5 Ds. You get directly involved. First D is direct. The second D is to distract. You try to distract the other people. The third D is to delegate. You get someone else involved. You may go after a police officer. You may go after a store manager to do something, to intervene. You may delay. You may do something to delay the situation by a whole host of ways. And finally, you may document, such as I know Lucy is on the line here tonight. Lucy has done some great videotaping with her camera. She documents when there's some aggression that might be taking place. So these are the 5 Ds. Again, direct, distract, delegate, delay, document. So the big picture for tonight is that we all are here in part, and I'm happy to see we're up to 108 people. Dr. Myers, that's incredible. 108 people. I think it says a lot about how there is hope out there, because together we can do a lot of great things. And that's what you were saying. So tonight, what we want to talk about is this big picture of how do you deal with ugliness in our society right now? We are in a deeply polarized and sometimes very ugly situation right now in our country. The political situation is ugly. Our democracy is in a difficult state. We're all concerned about it, but we also see ugly things happen. Like my wife, Sue, who's on the line here tonight, she saw something happen at Barnes and Noble where a man just got really ugly with somebody else. Well, what do? Well, you can become the Good Samaritan. You can become someone who does one of those 5 Ds, and you can do something right then and there when that happens. So if we can accomplish helping each other think through and discuss how to do that tonight, then I think we've accomplished something important. And so that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to introduce some of those terms or define them. Many of them had already been used, but then provide a little bit of definition. And before I close, I just want to say thank you all for being here. It's an inspiration to me that you are here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bach. You provided some clarity on some terms that have been thrown around here. Maybe people have heard in the media or elsewhere. We want to move on to our next panelist. We have, so it sounds like someone perhaps is unmuted. If we could all mute ourselves, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And our next panelist we have is Sharon Tracy. She's going to provide a little bit more insight into this de-escalation that we're talking about. Ms. Tracy is Executive Director of Quabbin Mediation in Orange, Massachusetts, and she founded Quabbin in 1995. She's an international trainer and spokesperson on the implementation and impact of de-escalation in both formal and informal settings. Ms. Tracy is from a multi-generational military family and has a heart and passion for working with veterans and a passion for the beautiful countryside that surrounds her home. So at this point, please welcome Sharon Tracy.
Thanks, Felicia. Thank you for having me on this panel. This is really invaluable. And I'm being inspired by the speakers who have gone before me. I was thinking how lucky I am to, have people speaking before me, because some of the things that folks said really resonated with sort of my history. So I'm here to talk about our program called Training Active Bystanders, which we created in 2006. But I want to go back 50 years to when I was quite young. Well, I was an adult. And I was trained in nonviolent direct action, by a man in my community named Wally Nelson. Wally Nelson, he died in 2002, was born in 1909. He's an African-American civil rights and peace activist. And I wanted to read you this quote because Dr. Myers started out talking a lot about nonviolence. And this is a underpinning for all the work that I've done my whole life. So I'm going to read Wally's quote. I feel like it's nonviolence is the constant awareness of the dignity and the humanity of oneself and others. Nonviolence is a courageous acceptance of active love and goodwill as the instrument with which to overcome evil and transform both oneself and others. It renounces violence and excludes retaliation. So, like I say, that philosophy sort of underpins all of the work that we do in cooperative mediation, and it certainly underpins the sort of the fabric. It's woven through the fabric of our Training Active Bystanders program. We use a training for trainers model. We train members of communities to teach this program to their communities. The first place we taught it in a community setting, well, we started out teaching it in schools. And we found over the course of the year, there was a 20% reduction in harm doing in the schools that we had introduced the program compared to the control schools. And we realized after working with the schools for a number of years that Training Active Bystanders, or TAB as we call it, is a means of community self-regulation. A principal in the school really explained it. He said, we were talking about the school to prison pipeline. And he said, our disciplinary measures, our suspensions, our, kids pulled out of class and, sent home or whatever, has decreased from 1,000, this is a fairly small school, 1,000 before we started the program to under 100. And he said it is because the students who have been trained in this program regulate themselves. They see something going on, they intervene, they prevent escalation. And so it never rises to the level of the adults, the authorities dealing with the situation. The students take care of it themselves. And so the concept of community self-regulation, which, let's see, Ms. McDaniels was talking exactly about that. The idea that our communities can regulate themselves. We can. We don't need authorities. We can take care of it for the most part. So with TAB is a means of analyzing situations. People come to us groups, and the first place we taught this in the community, we had been brought in by a partnership between Temple Tir Shikva and the Islamic Center of Boston. First thing the Islamic Center of Boston folks said is, if you're going to teach people to call the police when they see something going on, we don't want you. And we said, no, we don't tell anybody how to do it. The community who is being trained figures out what the harm is they have in their community and how to deal with it. So we train people from the community to teach it. And I just wanted to run through a couple of the elements. As I say, we don't tell people what to do. People figure it out during the course of a training. They figure out what they have the power to do in a particular situation or when they are confronted in reality. I also have to say that there's a real lot of bystander programs out there, and there's a lot of, yep, this is how to do it, and yep, this is how to do it, and it's wonderful. I am really happy that this concept of bystandership is really making a splash. And it's not just in the US either. We work also in Canada and the UK. Felicia, you need to like tell me if I'm going on too long, because you know me. I was just going to run through real quick what we define as the inhibitors, what keeps us from stepping in and taking action. And then I wanted to run through quickly what the promoters are. I'll say the names, you know what those are. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how communities can evolve depending on the, you going to say something, Felicia?
Nope, I was going to say, if you could do that in a couple of minutes, that would be fabulous.
I'll talk fast.
Okay.
Okay, inhibitors, pluralistic ignorance. This is assuming you're a witness, there's a group of people around, you're in a bystander situation. Pluralistic ignorance. Everyone around you is looking like they don't think anything is wrong. So you think, well, geez, something feels wrong, but everyone doesn't think so. So pluralistic ignorance. Diffusion of responsibility. There's so many people there that nobody who knows who is responsible to take action. Ambiguity of the need for help. It's unclear whether help's needed or not. Fear of social, this is more fear of social consequences. Somebody's not going to like you if you step in and say, oh, by the way, you shouldn't be doing that. That sort of thing. And then there's danger. And we know what that danger can be, everything from somebody yelling at you, losing your job, to getting killed. We're really clear that there is a danger if you decide to step in and be an active bystander and intervene. So those are the 5 promoters. In the course, what we do is ask people in small groups to figure out how they would break each of those inhibitors. Just to think about it, you know, to get some ideas in your mind. So the promoters of active bystandership are reciprocity, self-interest. Self-interest is my favorite. Because, I mean, everyone has self-interest. That's not a bad thing. Empathy, responsibility for others, and inclusive caring. And I always kind of end with moral courage. Moral courage. It takes moral courage to intervene. It takes moral courage to try and de-escalate, you know. So I also wanted to mention that we created this with a psychology professor back in 2006, and a guy who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And we talk about how communities evolve. If it becomes the norm, okay, so if there's a bystander situation and somebody steps in and says, oh, this isn't okay, and stops the harm from happening, the harm doer is less likely to do harm in the future. The bystanders are more likely to take action in the future, and the person who stepped forward and gathered allies around them to take action is definitely more likely to do so again in the future. This happens with a community too. So your community will evolve into a more positive place as the norm becomes, we help each other. Conversely, if harm doing happens and there is no intervention, the harm doer thinks it's okay and will escalate in the future. The other bystanders think, oh, well, you know, I guess it's okay. And there is a de-evolution of the community, which is what leads to genocide. So on that happy note, I just want to also mention we do use a train the trainers model. And because of the COVID, we've been happily doing these community trainings in cyberspace. We've got a couple coming up, you know, we got some folks from California and Colorado and, you know, over. And so it's really cool because we can bring people together from all over the country to work together in a different way than if we get a call from the Human Rights Commission of this particular community and we will go in and teach in that community. So, okay, I'll stop talking now, Felicia.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tracy, for sharing that detailed information about the different steps people can kind of see and understand de-escalation in a new way. and kind of get a sense of what are the different parts of that? What is the process of that? We're going to move on to our final panelist tonight, Cabrina Bass. Ms. Bass is Executive Director of Midlands Mediation Center in Columbia, South Carolina. She brings a background in the for-profit and the nonprofit religious sector into her community work. She's recently able to get the governor of South Carolina to declare October Mediation Month. And she is finishing her master's degree in conflict resolution. And if that's not enough, she's also taking care of 2 children. Please welcome Cabrina Bass.
Thank you so much, Felicia. And let me say welcome to everybody. I'm one that likes to engage in conversation and dialogue. So if you all, while I'm talking, if you all can just let me know where you all are coming from in the chat so we can know how far the reach is of the dialogue that's going on today, that would be amazing and great. There's an old poem that I remember. I heard somebody say it was first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. And that's what de-escalation is about, is our opportunity to speak up, to say something, and to help people in a journey. The reason I was invited today is because of our work with the youth in our community and our desire to create community and harmony. And one of the things that we recognize is that you can't stop a behavior unless you really address the root causes within those behaviors. And so oftentimes people want to start with the youth and teaching them how to de-escalate or use skills, but then they go back to a home that doesn't have that same skill set. They go to a community center that does not have the same skill set. They go to schools that don't have the same skill set. And so until we're ready to train up a community and make a difference in the world that we lived in, people can be taught the skills, but unless we're going to wrap it around our community and make it part of our culture, part of our language, and part of who we are, we basically keep going in a circle of conflict. So we're excited that we have literally started working with our schools and started with our school administrator to begin talking to them about conflict and how do we help others to address conflict. So when you talk about conflict, it's beginning to listen, right? It's beginning to hear one another and see each other's humanity. So one of the things I often talk about in the trainings that I do is that when you look at curriculum and you look for when children are taught to listen, they're taught in kindergarten. It's the first time listening is a core essence of learning. And it never appears again. So after kindergarten, if you don't learn to listen in kindergarten, you never learn to listen. And so because we have lost our skills to listen, to not hear one another, we often end up in conflict, and those conflicts end up escalating. So my best example is that when we start the conversation, it is so important for us to make sure that we heard what we thought we heard. And what does that mean? It means that we usually talk at about 125 words per minute, but we think at 400 words per minute. That means that we're only using about 45% of our brain's capacity during the time someone is speaking. So what is the rest of our brain doing? It's filling in the gaps. It's making assumption. It's when our culture steps in. It's when our biases steps in. It's when our gender identity step in. It's all those other things, that noise that's within communication steps in and causes us to misunderstand what it is that we thought we heard somebody say. And it's from that level of understanding that we begin to react and respond to what it is that we thought we heard we say. And then because nobody is clarifying, correcting, or even confirming that that was actually what was spoken, now we have entered a point where things are beginning to escalate. And if there's nobody there to hit a pause button, nobody there to come in with a rational brain to slow it down, we end up seeing people pull out their cell phone to watch the reaction, videotape it, and hope it goes viral so they can get the attention. So it's time for us to make a change. How do we make this change? really got to take, as the First Lady, Miss Ruth, talked about, it's each of us making that change. It's each of us checking our own biases, checking, are we really listening to one another? And as we say in NAVCAM, are we here to hear? When we talk about listening, it isn't just with our ears, it's with our whole being. It's giving somebody full, undivided attention and making sure we're listening so that we can hear what people are saying, and making sure that we not just listen and then walk away assuming that we heard what we think they said, but doing those clarifying words to affirm what it is that people are saying so that we can take the actions to make a difference. I've been on a radio talk show trying to talk to people saying, no, you got to listen. You got to hear one another, right? Have conversation, but be very careful to check what you think you heard. So we start with ourselves first as being someone that is committed to hearing what others are saying. I think we can start seeing a difference. Try it at home with your kids. Instead of interrupting them, just sit and listen and hear what they've said. And then ask the question, you know, to make sure you understood what it was that they said. And I promise you, you're probably going to reduce a whole bunch of conflict in your house just by taking a moment to listen, to hear somebody else, and to ask those questions. And the second thing is, once we do it with ourselves, then it's time for us to go out into our community and our work. Is to start to slow down things, is to listen to one another and ask questions so you can get clarity. Then once you get into your community, into your workplace, it's time to go into the community. Imagine what would happen in our churches if we just slow down to hear one another, to listen and appreciate what others are saying. And then it's time to go into our schools with our children. Oftentimes people want the work of conflict resolution or de-escalation to be done with children at high risk. And I'm challenging us to start with children that haven't gotten into any trouble yet, teaching those skills that they will need in order to address conflict, but making sure that we don't just stop with them, that we contact their parents and have a conversation with them, get into the community conversation with them, and into our schools and our administrators in conversation with them. And I think we'll begin to see the change that we're looking for, where we have a community that knows how to listen to each other. And when things start to rise up, we can all pause, take a breath, and ask the question, what is it that I don't know? Did I really hear what they said? And can I ask them to clarify, correct, or confirm what it is that I think I heard them say? And I think that'll begin to make the difference, and we'll make a change in our society and really have an opportunity to hear one another once again. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you, Miss Cabrina Bass. You just broke it down, made it so simple that listening, just start there. Let's just listen to each other. It's so important and such a basic thought, but we don't always go straight to that thought in circumstances when things are kind of rising up and getting out of control. Well, at this point, we are going to move on to our breakout rooms, and we hope you're all able to have great conversations. We have someone who can help to facilitate the conversation in each of those rooms, and they'll hopefully help you kind of just think about what you've heard tonight, what you've learned tonight. And the breakout rooms we're going to do for 10 minutes. And when you get back, we ask that you would have one person who might be willing to report a very brief summary of your discussion. And at this point, if we're ready, DG, are you ready to send us into our rooms? I'm glad everyone is back, and hope you had wonderful conversations in your small rooms, and we're really able to go into some detail with what you may have learned or how you might see this as important in your community. At this point, we just want to open it up. You can use the raise hand feature if you know how to use that to speak for your group, or at least to share some points that your group made about de-escalation in your community, what you learned tonight. We're open really to whatever you'd like to share with the large group. I see Sherry Bruckner. If you could unmute yourself.
Hello, I'm reporting live from Alexandria, Minnesota. And our group talked about the de-escalation really being applicable everywhere. that because we are so polarized, and just teaching self-regulation and empathy and those tools before it becomes a place of violence. So really just knowing those tools maybe at a younger age or in settings where you can use that. And one of the challenges we saw to de-escalation is that basic fear that people have, and to the unwillingness to be uncomfortable and step out of our comfort zones for that self-preservation, and how important it might be to kind of start asking those questions and being a little more comfortable with people being angry, as long as we could set the parameters of how much that anger shows up or how it's expressed, but just allowing that space for that to happen.
So important, so important. Thank you. Mindy Burrell, could you please share?
Sure. Our group was first of all, they were very impressed and very grateful to all of the speakers for breaking it down and giving us some frameworks and some bite-sized ways to look at all of this. And really quickly, what it came down to for us was thinking that we would really love to focus our efforts working on schools, working with kids, and the younger, the better, but also doing it in as comprehensive a way as possible, so that we're not giving kids some new perspectives, but then sending them back into homes or neighborhoods where things are operating as usual. So kids as much as possible, as early as possible, and as comprehensively as possible.
Thank you so much. Patsy, could you please share from your group?
Sure. I feel kind of bad. One of our people was having a lot of technical difficulties, so that took up almost our whole 10 minutes up trying to get them in and get them introduced and everything. But, you know, people did share about just the increase that they are seeing in their areas. You know, the shooting at a bus stop, a young person, and some people, just increase in crime in general. One of our gentlemen talked about how he's with an organization that helps out with, you know, really intervening and helping with de-escalating that, you know, maybe two youths have shot each other. They're both in the hospital and both their families are in the waiting rooms and they're fighting. And so, you know, there's just so many layers and so many levels that this is necessary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm just going by order of who I see coming up with the raise hand feature. I'm going to move to Sharon Tracy.
Oh, I'm not muted. Thank you, Felicia. So we were like pulled out of our little group universe very rapidly, and so didn't really get a chance to talk a whole lot, although Lisa was talking about how she doesn't mediate so much, but she works in facilitation and lifts people up, helps them understand what their gifts are and their talents, so that to better be able to facilitate conversation. I personally made the remark that I have a colleague who teaches intervention in conflict. She works with police forces and such. And she teaches a methodology where people don't have to actually lay hands on other people to de-escalate them. She makes the point that de-escalation is not really possible unless the person who is escalating voluntarily calms down. Otherwise, there needs to be a show of force, as opposed to a show of concern. And she says that safety, people can't de-escalate until they feel safe. For whatever that means, in whatever kind of context, safety is critical. And so her contention is that there's a really big burden put on police that they're supposed to de-escalate when actually their job is to make the scene safe for everybody, rather than, you know, mediate or whatever. So I just wanted to bring up that issue of safety.
Thank you. Mickey? Go ahead.
Yes, really, honestly, my group seemed to be very, very well educated and expert in working in their communities and actually quite familiar with de-escalation. I think a theme that kind of came up is that if, like this whole idea of communities regulating themselves, like if members of a community know how to assess the situation, make decisions about, would this be a good time for me to intervene? Should I find others around me who can help me? Like if community members are actually trained in how to de-escalate, it would greatly reduce the need to contact police, which so very often ends in very unfortunate circumstances. So we all kind of agreed that this would be a good opportunity to hope and do what we can to ensure that Representative Moore's legislation gets into committee and gets passed, because that would really, really help the community be able to learn these techniques themselves.
Give me that conditioner and come here.
Well, thank you, Mickey. Jill, could you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Felicia. Well, some of the things that others have said was brought up in our group as well. One thing I wanted to add is Earl was sharing about all the different complex and multiple issues that there are right now for everyone, from homelessness, the pandemic, job loss. And there just needs to be more of that concerted effort by citizens that aren't necessarily as impacted every day, and then faith leaders to really create space where they can practice these skills so that they can understand the need for them and really start to make a difference and not just sit in silence.
Absolutely. Thank you. Miss Cabrina Bass. Could you go?
Okay, thank you very much. Our group, we introduced ourselves from the different spaces which we held. I put my notes inside of the chat feature so you all can have it as a recording. And I love Jill, she's one of my favorite cohorts. But one of the things we talked about was it is community. It was really about the community being empowered to do the work, but understanding that that empowerment needs resources. And so therefore there's a need to invest into the individual community. And the other part of it is not, a lot of times we see people on the outside of community coming in to help communities do the work. And then when they finish, quote unquote, the work, then they leave the community, and oftentimes when they leave the community, those resources, those skills leave with them. And so the community is back in the same state it was prior to the outsiders coming in. And so that investment in a community to keep it inside of that community where those things are going on is necessary, which means if the training is going to occur, it's not trainers from the outside coming in, but it's those that are on the inside getting the skills and then sharing the skills with the people that are already in the community, not having outsiders coming in, but investing in the community that's already there. The stories that were shared were amazing, but I think the biggest one that I would take away from our dialogue was the fact of Rep. Moore talked about being a Black mother with sons and the fear of that child leaving and not knowing if they're going to come home, but them growing up to be grown men and still having the same fear that they may not come home, and having to live like that every single day for the fact that they are Black males in a society where escalation is not just coming from the streets, but it's also coming from the people that are supposed to provide, as some have said, the safety in the community where they are no longer safe. So that's my group and our feedback, and I hope I represented us well.
Thank you so much. I do want to make note that in the chat box, there is a document. The planning group for this event did put together some resources. So if you could please click on that at some point before the meeting ends and save it to your computer. It'll give you a few more resources that you can look at websites, look at documents, and get a little bit more information on de-escalation. Ayana, could you please share what your group spoke about?
I will, thanks. And I just want to echo what Kabrina was saying just now about the real fear when you are a mother to a Black son that every single day they may not make it home. In my group, I had Gail from Spokane, Gina from Pittsburgh, Marty from Casa Grande, Arizona, and Alice from New York. We did not have enough time to get into all the conversation that we wanted to. We were having a very rich conversation around, the fact that there are so many different efforts around de-escalation in our communities. They're so disparate, they're not connected, and the lack of cohesion makes it so hard to figure out how to help and how to move the work forward. We also talked about 2 different communities where school board meetings have gotten close to violence because people are so upset about vaccines and masking, and that the school board meetings have become the hub for this kind of violent advocacy and division, and people wanting to find a way to figure out how they can help. How could they de-escalate those situations if they were in those rooms? We didn't come up with any answers, but it does seem like some of the speakers who spoke today have some wonderful resources for how to be a violence interrupter, or how to use the conflict resolution skills that we have to de-escalate. So a wonderful conversation that we were having, and I'm really pleased that I had those folks in my group.
Good. I'm sorry that there wasn't more time. I think we would probably end this at 10 o'clock if we all really got into our conversations and kept going. But Victoria, could you share what your group spoke about?
I wanted to highlight the beginning of our conversation and where we were starting and where it could have potentially gone. And I want to practice what Ms. Bass has taught us about the listening. So from what I heard in our conversations, is that from us, we're kind of all over, from the South to the North England area, and then even out West a little bit, that the applicability is not there yet because our communities don't know what the de-escalation actually means. So the definitions that we had this evening, not everybody is in tune to or even knows. And so that is definitely a challenge to be able to apply the de-escalation practices that we want to see in our community, and that the utilization isn't there because, again, there's no examples of it in the community that they can really have tangible ideas from. And then another point that was made too is that there is not that listening aspect that we went over this evening in our communities. We can hear each other, but we're not listening. And the focus may be on certain topics, but the discussion of the impact on the communities is not there as well. So that's something that I think I heard as well. And I guess I'll put my own opinion in there too, that could possibly be a barrier for de-escalation as well. And I think that that's something that should probably be considered when we're talking about de-escalation in our communities and the ways to go about those.
Thank you. And Micah, could you share, please?
Sorry about that. I was in the chat getting that file. So I didn't know if I could be the one to just represent for the group, but we sort of talked about what our takeaways were from this presentation and what we found valuable. And it was nice to see a sort of varied, from a presentation, varied but rich. It sort of pieced, everybody took a different piece that sort of made a whole, I thought. My takeaway was that I walked away with tangible tools where, if I'm in a situation I can use right away. And we talked about how the important point of listening and how powerful listening is, and how we can just sort of gloss over without realizing that we're not hearing people, but just stopping and taking that time to listen, how that can change the situation. And the power of learning to communicate and what that means to actually take the time to educate yourself on effective communication. And that is a real skill. It's a skill set you have, that some people may just have it, but it's definitely something I think we all need to learn to do better. And then, one of our participants actually was like, some of this stuff was familiar. And as soon as it was brought up, it was like, bam, 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 which told me like, this is stuff that you can take with you and have in your toolbox. So it was a refresher for that person. And if I missed something, I apologize. And I wasn't as great a listener to be able to remember everybody's name, but I will tell you after 5 p.m., my brain cells start to go to sleep. So that was the best I could do.
Not a problem at all. I will say, just another note to those who are on your cell phone, you might have a hard time downloading any files. So we will look into the possibility of emailing this out to the registration list, just for people who might not be able to access it for some reason. All right, well, we're finishing up. So we're going to do our last two people with their hand raised. Lewis Cohen, could you please share?
Thank you very much. I had Find Human Beings in our group, Andrew, Liliana, Diane, and Julie. Of course, I was there. And eclectically, all areas were touched in this communication. There were those that appreciated the 5 Ds: directly involve, distract, delegate, delay, and document as key factors, and focusing on slowing down the moment to interrupt violence was discussed. A teacher from Brazil, Liliana, it's a global problem, not just a problem we face in the United States, it's all over. Important to create space for peace and focus on more healthy communities. The 5 Ds were also mentioned too. It was very useful. And Liana said that she uses her students' stories in her teaching, which is very important. Experiential, the feelings of students coming out so others can hear also. And of course, the moderator being Liana, in her classroom. Diane, de-escalation, talked about in the home, community, meetings, schools, improving school safety, liked Ruth's presentation, and saw Ruth's presentation as also experiential, right on, it was happening, just as she was speaking. You felt like you were there. Listening to understand and not to respond is a key factor too. Julie felt the speakers were great. Also talked about Lady Ruth's anecdotes, good examples, and be watchful about reactions and stepping back, and emphasis on community addressing issues, not just the police. And using 3 words: watch, do, and teach, and practice to be an example. So eclectically, we touched on many questions, and I want to thank all those who were in our breakout room.
Thank you. And Prabha, could you
in
please
30
share?
seconds,
Yeah.
Lucy, Shar, Margaret, and Hajamaye, I will add what hasn't been mentioned so far, which is that it needs to begin with children at various stages, and that one of the challenges is overcoming our internal anxiety and barriers to intervening, which is why sessions like this are extremely important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are coming up to our 8:30. We are so happy that Representative Moore, you have stayed on with us the whole time. And we appreciate you sharing in your group and being here and listening to all of our different panelists. We appreciate all the people, all our panelists and those who spoke and those who shared what was discussed in your groups. I'm going to offer it at this point back to Dr. Myers, if you'd like to say any last words.
Well, thank you, Felicia, and thank you for your excellent moderation. And thank you to this committee for pulling this together. We talk about having a brain trust. We talk about intellectual power. Well, you demonstrated it tonight. DG, I know that you've been back there, you know, strategizing and pulling things together, and Prabha and Felicia, Cabrina, just a wonderful network. Black Women for Positive Change is so proud to affiliate with each of you, Nikki McDonough, and the whole team. And we just have to keep pushing. Congresswoman Moore is there for us, and she's just outstanding. And so we have to think up new ideas, creative approaches. And I call on all of you to do some writing. Get your op-eds in the local paper. If we're going to educate the nation about what de-escalation is, Dr. Bach's 5 points, and all these other concepts, we've got to do it. So blog, write, do a book, make a movie, give a speech, make a video game. I mean, we have to come up with some approaches that are new and different. And with a little luck, maybe our beloved Congresswoman will help us get a little action here or there, a little funding here or there, and make it all worth it. So thank you all so much. This is what the month of nonviolence is designed to be. You're reaching a goal here. This is not just leadership in America, it is leadership for the world. We have colleagues in the United Kingdom who are watching and looking at the tapes and paying attention. And we just have to get this further out around the world. So thanks so much to all of you for spending your evening. Please go on monthofnonviolence.org, sign up for the other events, send us some feedback. I appreciate criticism in addition to feedback. So please be frank, tell us what's on your mind, and let's keep pushing. We've got a big agenda, but we can do it. We can do it. So thank you so much.